Well, good morning to everyone. Thank you for coming to this opening session today on Tuesday. It's great to have you all here at this hour in the morning. And well, first I want to introduce myself. My name is Jose Antonio Mejia. I work at the Inter-American Development Bank, and I will have the honor of moderating this panel today. First of all, start me by thanking the organizers and the hosts for this wonderful event. We have enjoyed great sessions yesterday. It's a beautiful venue, and everything has been wonderful. My only comment that I have about this event is the logo. Whenever I see it, I feel the need to play Candy Crush on my telephone. So as you know, the topic today is the political economy of statistical capacity building. Who wants to know? That is the question that it's on the table. And for that, we have 6 great panelists. Allow me to introduce them. I'll start from my immediate left, Hernán Muñoz. Hernán Muñoz is the National Director of Planning, Institutional and International Relations in the National Institute of Statistics and Census in Argentina, INDEC. And he will provide us with a national view from his recent experience at INDEC in the last couple of years. Then we have Oliver Chingaya. He is now the director of the African Center for Statistics at UNECA, and he's been there for a couple of years. He has a lot of experience in the statistical community in Africa. He will provide us a regional view, an interesting regional view. Then we have Ambassador Thomas Gass. Ambassador Gass is a Swiss diplomat who currently serves as the head of the South Cooperation Department of the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, SDC. And he will provide us with the perspective from a donor country. Then we have Haishan Fu, who is the director of the World Bank's Development Data Group. She will provide us with a global view on this topic. Then we have Michel Mugello Catula. He is presently a lead consultant at the African Development Bank and previously worked at Eurostat. So he will provide us not only with a regional view, but a multi-regional view, given his experience also in Europe. And last but not least, we have Philippe Schonrock, who is the director of CEPEI, an independent think tank based in Colombia. He will give us a perspective from the non-governmental side. So before we start with short opening statements by each of the panelists, I just want to open up with a little bit of an introduction. So if I could have my slides, please. I always say that statistical information is just like water. We use it every day for everything. For every decision that we make, we just use it without thinking about it. And just like water, we only seem to think about data when it's missing or when it's of bad quality. And just like we take water for granted and we expect it to come out of a faucet whenever we open it, it seems like we expect data to flow out of a website whenever we open a website. And in this, it seems that we forget that behind these data flows are institutions, are complex institutions and complex processes that they go every day, they collect data, they synthesize data from different sources. And these institutions are the national statistical offices. And the objective of this session is just to talk about these national statistical offices, but not from the regular perspective that we're used to when we talk about statistical capacity and we think about methodologies and ways to do things, ways to collect data. Here we want to think about the organizational side of this institution. The way they not their functions, but their functioning, the way they do things, the environment in which they exist. These are not just in a vacuum. They are part of a government. They are part of a state. And as that, they are subject to political pressure and they are subject to the environment in which they function every day. So with that introduction, let me pass the word to Hernán Muñoz.
Okay, thank you very much, Jose. I have to say that as we started to design the statistical plan of the INDEC in Argentina after a period of deep institutional crisis, one of the main frameworks that help us to understand our capabilities and opportunities, especially after the crisis, especially in the feasibility and the speed of the reforms, were these papers that Jose Antonio kindly mentioned in our first conversations with the International Development Bank that now are finally summarized in a book. And I have to congratulate you publicly because I already done it privately. Well, I think it's very important that in these books you got a framework just to understand what are the processes and the political economies, equilibriums that you have to take into account when you are planning to do reforms in an NSO and in a national statistical system. So the independence of those who produce statistical data is relevant as they reflect as a mirror the most objectively possible image of a society at a given moment. Independence has diverse dimensions and complexity that I will explain later on the slides. But independence does not mean isolation from a National Statistical Office. In the contrary, I think that an independent NSO can, and it allows the NSO to have a better conversation with other stakeholders. So now it is useful to conceptualize the ways that an NSO can be harmed. Maybe we can see the slides. Are there some slides, Jose? Okay. Oh, there it is. William Seltzer wrote a well-known paper in 1994. This is more than 20 years ago. And this paper highlights 11 modes of institutional undermining of an NSO. In the case of Argentina, during the past political interference in the period of 2007-2015, all of them were applied. In the table, you can see the Seltzer's categories and concrete examples of how they were being carried out in the past in Argentina. And to begin with, I will talk about the mission of a statistical office in Argentina. The directive was that the statistics should be at the service of a political project. So the mission was changed. Seltzer was talking that 20 years ago, and he was telling that one way to undermine the NSO credibility and, of course, to affect the independence of the NSO was just changing the mission, or just, in Argentina, was virtually changed. Also, a great part of the stuff was replaced, and others were just, the methodologies were distorted, and responded bases were also used for non-statistical purposes. And INDEC was itself used for political means and in discredit campaigns against those who exposed these deviations. So all of them, all these 11 modes of intervention were used. The next slide, and you're going to see that, I would say, legal framework should cover all these modes, at least giving a protection, a de jure protection, and that is very well reflected in the book and in this framework that the International Development Bank, Inter-American Development Bank has prepared. But once you got assured the de facto protection of all those items, you have to move forward and go into the jure protection, because you never know. In Argentina, for example, in the past, you can see in this slide, in the past, all these modes were used. That's why they are right. They are in red. And now we are in a situation that, because of a political will, we have a total independence in the production of statistics, but it's not yet assured in a legal framework. And we are working on that. We are working how to anchor institutionally an independence of NSO. And that could be the next stage, the last one, just having all these items into a comprehensive legal framework. And so I think this process could be followed, or it's probably being followed by other NSOs, or was followed in the past, or will be in the future. And I think it's very important for us to having, I would say, a statistical policy framework, just to understand when we are working in NSO, many of us are statisticians or come from other or economists or sociologists, but just understanding the policy and the politics behind the reform processes of an NSO, it's also very important. So I thank you for that, and I think I should stop here, but later on we will follow with the questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Hernan. Oliver?
Thank you, moderator. Good morning. You started off by saying that statistics is like water. In the last one day, we've been hearing about so many descriptions of what statistics is all about. It's been described as a resource, it's the oil of the time, and all sorts of things have been said, accredited around being a resource. And I think, indeed, it's actually statistics are a resource that no longer can be looked as a tool. As someone who described it yesterday, is like we've been using them for M&E purposes. They go beyond just being used for monitoring and evaluation, but rather to be used in formulating the necessary decisions that are required in our various decision-making processes. At the regional level, indeed, statistics are used by countries, in particular in this era of SDGs, where there's so much demand now for data. It has become so important that it should be visible in the political economy by providing the data that inform the various aspects for SDGs. The question, however, that we want to ask ourselves is, are we producing data that is trusted, data that is credible, data that can actually be used by the user or by the researcher to inform whatever aspect that they want to be able to address? That's the question that we have. And we're at a crossroads now, in particular, where many areas of our work are being questioned, whether indeed the statistics that we produce are able to relate to the lives of the people on which we are producing the data for. And I think that the national statistical offices have an imperative need for them to begin to relook into themselves and question whether the statistics that they produce are indeed what the users would like to actually see out there in the public. And whether what is being produced is indeed what the policymakers, that's what they actually want to see in their books or not. And that means that the statisticians, we now need to change the way we look at things and stop being only just being gatekeepers of the UN fundamental principles of official statistics, and also begin to reach out to others that also produce statistics beyond just the national statistical offices, to be able to inform the various decision-making processes at the country level. So the issue of trust becomes imperative that we produce statistics that would go out there with very little questions, and if there are questions, we should be able to provide the necessary answers to those questions. The citizens themselves are also beginning to ask questions, whether the data that is being produced, they are able to relate themselves. Yesterday, one of our colleagues did remind us of an article that was written by the executive director of the RSS, where there are questions that are being raised all over the globe about whether the statistics that are being produced are indeed what they are or what they intend to be meaning. So it means that we have as statisticians, we need to change and begin to engage not just the policymakers, but also the general public citizenship, and produce the data that they can be able to relate themselves in a manner that they can actually see that if I produce this data, I can actually see myself in that particular number. Most oftentimes, as statisticians, I think we've ended up producing data that only end at averages. And who wants to just be an average? People want to go beyond just being an average. They want to see themselves beyond just a single number that's being produced, and not just being a number that is going to relate to others and not relate to the person that is that is being described to. So those are some of the things that are being looked at. Yesterday I spoke about the opportunity that I had on Thursday, having spoken to a group of ambassadors in Addis Ababa. And one of the things they were raising is that, look, you are producing all these beautiful things that you put up in the shelves. They're all nice, they all look nice. They look very glossy reports and so forth. But they don't mean anything to us because we cannot relate ourselves to the data or to the books, to this publication that you're producing. We want statistics that can tell a story, tell our own story, so that they can just go beyond just being an average, but be able to tell at the lowest level. And I can be able to relate myself to the number that is in the table, or at least to the figures that are being produced. And that is what is being asked of us as statisticians, that we can no longer be average statisticians, or that we just end up at, producing numbers that will allow only aggregated kind of analysis, but going beyond that. And that's what the citizens are actually asking. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Oliver. Thomas?
Thank you, Jose Antonio, and good morning to everyone. Actually, as I'm sitting here, I was wondering whether there was a misunderstanding. You know, I'm here supposed to represent the donors, but actually, I'm more of a customer to the statistics system. You see, I'm not part within the Swiss Agency for Development Cooperation. We have a part that deals with the multilateral system, that funds the UN agencies, the World Bank, etc., and that provides indirectly funding for the statistical system. And then we have the part which I'm heading, which is more with the operational side of working with 20 priority countries and on projects that we negotiate with the governments and the partners. And you see, from that perspective, I'm a customer, not a donor to the statistics system. Now, when I read the figure of, what is it, 1/3% of ODA goes towards statistics, I say, wow, there's something about the political economy of statistics there. And so let me just say, despite the fact that I'm more of a customer on the operational side, why am I sitting here? Well, it's because of the Agenda 2030. It's because this shared vision of humanity that was negotiated in a tough negotiation. I mean, some people out there say it's a left agenda. It's not a left agenda. It was a really tough negotiated agenda among 193 countries and so many other stakeholders who all try to pull the blanket to their side. You know, but this 2030 agenda puts us all in front of a couple of really important challenges. And these challenges, as a development cooperation agency, we feel them very concretely. And I'm going to just say 3 challenges which I look to the statistics community to help me tackle. You know. And to me, they relate to profound changes in paradigm in this 2030 agenda. The first one is this promise to leave no one behind. I mean, let's face it, before in the Millennium Development Goals, it was about reducing poverty by half. Sorry for the other half. Huh? Now we're promising to leave no one behind. Who is going to help me to understand who the most vulnerable people are? Who is going to give me the disaggregated data that I need and that my partners that I work with need to be able to know what these vulnerable people are facing in terms of risks, economic, social, environmental, political risks? The second challenge that the 2030 Agenda gives us is that it forces us to show the externalities of something. I mean, before we could focus on one country and say, well, okay, we have a water problem here, we have a food security problem here. But the 2030 Agenda doesn't allow us that anymore. I can't sit, you know, on the side of the Lake Geneva and sip my coffee and think that the world is okay, you know, and forget that maybe this coffee has 140 liters of water in it that are being used somewhere else in the world. And so showing the externalities, the economic, the social, the environmental externalities of development, who's going to show me that? You know, that cost. That's where I'm looking to the statistics. I'm not interested in rankings. I think that ranking countries according to SDGs is absolutely the contrary of the spirit of this declaration of interdependence, which the SDGs are. And the third point is the 2030 Agenda has inverted the paradigm of accountability. In the MDGs, it was all about accountability of those who receive to those who give, no? But the 2030 Agenda is about accountability of the states to their people. And so I'm looking for data that strengthens the relationship between duty bearers and rights holders. It's what you just said, no? And so here are my 3 points, no? Let's help us to have data that identifies, that disaggregates, that makes the most vulnerable visible. Help us have data that shows the externalities of development, and help us generate data that inverts the accountability paradigm, so that we in our development cooperation projects don't have to drill for our own water, you know, instead of taking the water that the statistics systems provide. Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas. Haishan.
Thank you very much. I'm really glad to speak after the three of you, because you made such a great advocacy for the importance of data. And indeed, I think for multilateral development agencies like the World Bank, data is an asset, both for our own work and also for our clients. And in that sense, that we really see, and our governors really see, the bank supporting countries in strengthening their statistical capacity as a core business of ours. And our Data Council really entrusts us the senior management entrusted us, the Data Council, to prioritize and coordinate our own statistical capacity to support countries. So this is why at the bank, my colleagues like to say we do data from farm to table. It's really the ambition of us to support countries to be not only to produce the primary statistics so essential for our development discourse, but also to look into how to leverage the new digital technology, disruptive technology, to generate the kind of data that are actionable and more granular in order to inform development decisions and actions at different level, from national, global to local. So I'm really glad to see that in this sense that over the time, bank has been really focusing on helping countries to develop statistical development plans to look at the data system as a whole, from the legal arrangement to the kind of institutional arrangement and technical resources required to seek to build a stronger capacity for the business. And at the same time, to really try to channel the technical knowledge about standards, about good practice to countries in order for them to do their business in data, in generating the kind of data with the kind of credibility and reliability required. But what is more important is that we're not just doing our work from data production to table itself, statistical tables, but also going beyond to see how those information are actually used to really inform the development discourse and decision making so that there's real impact of those data that influence how people's well-being is improved, what they can really bring to their dinner table to improve their lives. So I'm really glad to see that not only we, as a development agency, to really engage with our partners to provide that kind of technical assistance and technical support, we're also channeling financing to national statistical systems and national statistical offices. And here I'm really glad to see over the past decade and a half, there are over 100 million US dollars have been really disseminated or shared with different countries through the Trust Fund for Statistical Capacity Building. At the same time, they also acted as a catalytic force to bring additional resources through IDA lending to countries. As we see that still now, over 60-some countries, IDA countries, are not able to produce even as basic as the household survey data for monitoring changes in poverty. And here, I'm really glad to say, in the recent years, there's a scaling up of bank support through IDA to countries. Right now, we have, just in African alone, over 22 countries with the average of 20 million US dollars in terms of the size of IDA in countries really to support the improvement of national statistical systems. But supporting country is one side of our responsibilities, but the other side is what we do as an international development agency through the kind of data and knowledge that we generate and we share with the world in order to help empower citizens to use statistics to influence the development discourse. I'm really glad to see that by opening up the data, we have been able to compile and generate just over the past 6-7 years. We have seen over 10-fold of increase of people, users, access banks' open data products. And that amount to over 30 million users every year using the kind of data. Because when we can be open and we can be really making data accessible and useful, especially by sharing data in the form that individuals can relate to their daily lives, they will be able to use them to help the policymakers accountable and influence the decision making. I think this is really the direction that we're also supporting national statistical system to go forward so that there will be real trust in the data that we generate, therefore that can be used more credibly. Thank you.
Thank you, Haishan. Michel?
Thank you, Jose. Good morning, everyone. We have been talking about data and statistics as water, oil, new currency, energy, light. In a nutshell, I mean, it's a vital force. We all recognize it as a vital force. But is this our understanding of what data is as statisticians talking to other statisticians? Or are we truly sure that the people for whom this data is being generated have the same understanding of what it means for their own lives? Dealing with the political economy of statistics, if there is one word I would wish to first underline, that is the economy. And an economy is for people. Where there are no people, there is no economy. And those people are men and women with their own language, their culture, activities, emotions, and their individual and collective realities. If we want our data to mean something to them, it must reflect, it must be mirroring these various aspects of individual and community lives. And our data should be goods and services which they would be easily relating to as they will try to overcome challenges in their lives. Let us therefore look at the way the private sector is addressing this type of situations where, on the one hand, we have people with their realities, and on the other hand, we have private firms with goods and services which they are producing. The first challenge for them is to bridge the gap between people who don't even know that products are there, which are being created anew. They have to bridge that gap between that ignorance of the existence of the products and what the firms are actually doing. And they do it through commercials. And what do we know about commercials? Commercials are based on science, and that science is neuroscience. Or if we adopt the language of the movie industry, we will say we have neurocinematics. And what is neurocinematics? It's just about recognizing that a particular person, even though they are not aware of the existence of something, if you want that thing which you have created to be appealing to them, you need to talk to their mind, you need to talk to their heart, you need to talk to their cells. You need to establish some kind of cellular dialogue between those people and yourself, so that the information you will be throwing to them will be recorded at levels which they may not even imagine could exist in themselves. We may need to learn from those processes as we wish to engage with the people, so that at some point they would be even the ones craving for what we would have created, and it will become part of them. How are we going to do it? How are we going to create a pure data economics? There are many possible answers to these questions. What I would suggest is that we try to reshape the statistical landscape through 5 dimensions. One is data generation focus, meaning that in everything we do, we need to make sure that it is data production oriented. The second thing is data consciousness, with the primary objective of recognizing data as a language, as a unifying cultural fabric. The third is strategic alignment, meaning that if we want to do something that is effective, we need to have frameworks that are clearly established And examples of frameworks could be related to statistical capacity development or building. Another example is to redefine the way we develop our own strategies for the development of statistics. A third example is to develop guidelines to transform M&E, monitoring and evaluation data, into official statistics. The fourth dimension is open collaboration, open cooperation, open partnership. And this is justified by the fact that data is no longer a monopoly. Data is being produced by everyone, and it is being provided to, and it can be provided to anyone. As I was saying yesterday in a different panel, whenever we refer to data, we have to bear in mind that it is a flow of information from all to all. The fifth dimension is data friendliness and storytelling promotion. I need to love data. I need to be looking for data. I need to understand data without anyone sitting beside me to explain to me what it is about. And we have new technologies that can help in this respect. And storytelling, this has been already mentioned by Oliver. I'm not going to mention it again. And when we come to some specific questions, I may further elaborate on what I said. Thank you.
Thank you, Michel. Philippe?
Yes, good morning, Jose Antonio and colleagues. Well, I was asked to have a view as a non-state actor, which is everything and nothing, if you can take it in a nutshell. So let me start in picking up what Ambassador just started to say of a transformative agenda, an opening that we have SDGs that actually created high expectation on statisticians and us as users, the think tank communities, civil society, private sector and others. We need good data as users, but between the reality and the utopia, we have a long stretch at this very moment. So I would like to concentrate, first of all, as non-state actors, what we would like to advocate for and how we are doing it at this very moment in a holistic approach in order to create an enabling environment that it's actually good in order to ensure the quality of data, the sharing of data, and of course, the use of it. The first of all, it's the policy coherence. We believe that non-state actors can help in the policy coherence and can actually shape those policies together, not only with statisticians, but with a broader development stakeholder ecosystem. And therefore, we need to talk politics as well. I believe as non-state actors, we are too shy to go into talking to parliaments, to talk about this is national statistics laws, which actually enables us to be users of the statistics that you as statisticians actually produce. So therefore, I believe in order to create a good enabling environment, we have to talk politics as well. The third point is the public pressure. I do believe we need to advocate for better data, and not only better data, better access to data and better understanding of that data. Because when you see, when I talk to my colleagues and we talk about statisticians, it's talking about outer dimension, maybe even other people from other planets sometimes, because it is so far away from the end users' necessities. The end users really use and how we can get this data on the ground for decision making, for monitoring and evaluation, and actually in order to help us to shape policies towards a holistic and transformative agenda like the SDGs. And I believe also the fourth part, in order that we have a development ecosystem that includes all stakeholders, we need public pressure. And that public pressure has to be open, it has to be transparent, but it has to be done with the right capacities. And there's where I would be very autocritical in saying we as non-state actors need to actually foster and trigger the capacities in order not only to understand better the data that it's produced, but also to make a good use of it in order that it helps us as non-state actors to be relevant and not to be between a reality and a utopia, like I was saying. And most, it is, we have high expectations, specifically on statistical systems in order to give us the soul of our discourse. Because for us, statistics tell something, but it's the stories of us that are on the ground that actually sell that story and make it a real use for the communities that we work for. So that would be my opening ideas.
Thank you. No, thanks to all the panelists. And now, we're opening a round of questions without any particular order, even though I already told Thomas that he was going to be the first. But I changed my question. Haishel mentioned something that is very relevant. If we talk about, she said data as an asset. And you come from an institution that has a limited budget to give around, and you have to decide where to invest those resources. So how do we prove that financing statistical capacity is an investment? How do we prove that there's a value, that is a return on that investment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a question that goes right to the core. Yeah? And as I said just now, I think that actually most of the funding that we provide to statistics is an involuntary or an indirect funding. I mean, we fund UNFPA, UNICEF, the World Bank, etc., mostly through core funding, and we acknowledge and we think it's really important that this multilateral system helps to promote statistics, you see. But we're not really investing into statistics very consciously. We do to some extent. I should correct myself. I mean, and I need to show my thankfulness to our colleagues from our National Statistics Office, Mr. Ulrich and all others. George, I think, is known here in this circle, who are pulling us into some projects and for example, with the Palestinian Authority or in Albania to strengthen municipalities, to provide better services to the people, and there to then bring in the statistical component. And then we start realizing what an asset statistics really is and how vital it is to strengthen that relationship and to make sure that the services that are then provided actually accrue to the people. So what is it that we can do concretely as a development agency? Besides some of these projects, we have recently developed a guideline on leaving no one behind. And I hope everyone else is doing the same in the room, because I think that we need to do that if we want to reach the Agenda 2030. It has 4 commitments. That guideline. The first commitment is that we're going to focus on poverty and on those left behind and look at the multidimensional the facets of poverty. Then we're going to look at exclusion. We're going to look at mainstreaming, leaving no one behind in our various operational PCM instruments. And the fourth one is really the important one. We're going to strengthen data systems, disaggregated data systems, to provide us the information that we need so that we recognize the most vulnerable and so that the relationship between duty bearers and rights holders is strengthened. So you see, 1 out of 4 commitments, one of them is about strengthening data systems. Now that is quite a shift in approach, and where I think, besides specific projects like the one I mentioned in Albania and with the Palestinian Authority, I also believe that we need to leverage our whole development cooperation portfolio because all our projects generate data. They generate data, but mostly data that we've been using for ourselves to better control and to better check the progress of the projects and to be accountable to our donors. What we need to do is every project that we implement, in the design phase, we need to check, okay, what's the data situation going to be in this project? What's the data situation going to be, and how can we connect this project to the national data statistics system? If we all do that, I challenge you all to do that in our projects, in the World Banks, in the commissions. I'm sure that we will turn this around and we start investing massively into statistics.
Thank you. And now, Haishan, on the same line, from a development bank, and just like we do at the Inter-American Development Bank, sometimes one sits in front of the finance minister, and there are multiple needs and limited resources. How do we convince the countries, and in this case, the Minister of Finance, to invest in data production?
Thank you. Actually, I'd like to turn to your book. In the book, you really conceptualized the relationship between statistical capacity and state capacity and how they reinforce each other. So it's really important for us to look at investing in statistical capacity in that light and how it will really help strengthen how government could really function effectively and carry out the development agenda they aim for. At the same time, I'd like to say that data is really the soft infrastructure of development. I remember I put forward this notion 5.5 years ago at the UNCES Commission session in 2013, when the whole discussion about a possible SDG agenda came forward. And I was saying, maybe this community need to be collectively think about how we position investing in statistics as a development agenda in its own right. So that we can really aim for holding all the government and donors accountable for investing in it, not just looking at it as a means for monitoring progress, but really as a means for really driving the data development agenda. So in that light, I'm really glad to see there are already increasing effort in looking at how we assess the returns to investment in data, and also trying to articulate what is the value of data. Eurostat has taken that on and looking at how them as a system, each national statistical office is investing in their basic functions and services, and what is possible use of that, and what could be the estimated returns to that. I know Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data has also ventured into looking at the value of data. The issue is that data is often an intermediary in achieving certain results. So the task of really identifying its value directly is a very complex and challenging task. But still, I think collectively we really need to be much more creative in looking at this issue and really shed light on what would be the relative returns when we're having to make choices. It's not just an ethical issue of whether you put in money in building a hospital and building a school that immediately see the returns and gains in human outcomes. But we really have to also see, by investing in credible, useful, relevant data, what would be the longer term benefit to the whole society. So this is where I think the whole, as a community, we're really facing this tremendous challenge, and we really need to become much more committed, but also much more proactive and creative in articulating that. And here I just really want to say that over the past few years, with the SDG agenda gaining importance, we have seen scaling up and more investment going into the data systems. I know that, Thomas, you mentioned that still in your own agency, you want to help change the mindset and really looking at the direct investment as a real real promising endeavor. And at the same time, I think we really need to be much more creative in communicating this and coming together. Here, I want to really mention that being open with the data that we produce and translating that into information that individuals could relate to makes a huge difference. I remember in the most recent SDG Atlas that we put out, when you really only share average information, for example, pollution, you could see what's the variation across the world. And then when you get into a country, you can see the variation across regions, sub-regions. But when you really use new measures and new sensors and getting the local level information of day-to-day changes or by seasons, individual citizens themselves start to see how themselves can relate to that, how their own life and health is being affected by that, so they can make the right choices to protect their own life, but also to start to exercise their own voices and request government actions, and that will bring about real changes in their lives in their own local community. And that kind of changes and benefit you can capture. So we will have to really look at what is the benefit of investing data and at what level it generates real result in terms of human outcomes and well-beings, and how much it improves government decisions at every level, especially at local level, to capture that immediate benefit. Therefore, we will be able to advocate and also articulate the value of data much more effectively and hence influence the decision making. I also want to say that it's not always dismal picture. Just at the ANGA event last month, there's an announcement of how donors are coming together to look at, for example, in the area of food security and agricultural productivity, the lack of data in so many countries need to be changed. And they come together, say, by 2030, let's have this longer-term view of how we can sustainably leverage resources from trust fund to IDA lending to supplement national domestic investment, so that we can really see a sea change in 50 countries by 2030. There's a real improvement in data in this area. So I really believe that there is already scaling up of focusing on the critical areas of SDG data and putting a longer-term investment and commitment to help countries to improve data. So we really need to look at this kind of new model of financing by leveraging donor support and multilateral development agencies' financing to support domestic investment. And there will be real change in this game, I believe.
Yeah, but I guess at the end, we need people to put their money where their worth is. And in that sense, Oliver, in many regions and countries, we see these big announcements and big commitments, and the presidents make a declaration that this is the year of civil registration, or we're going to invest in the census. Does that really translate into resources, or do we just are left with a nice speech and no money? I mean, how does the political economy work there?
Yeah, thank you for that question. This is the challenge that we're actually facing, commitment versus action. You're right. I mean, many times we have seen political statements, strategies, decrees being made that we're going to be financing so much, or there's so much amount must be put aside to support statistics, so much amount must be put aside to support agricultural statistics, so much must put aside to support a particular activity in statistics, or whatever area. But what we see is not the case on the ground in terms of what's being said, what is being committed. And that's where there is a disconnection. Our politicians make political statements. They go to these big conferences and they make signed documents and say, look, we are going to be supporting statistics. So I think the value for statistics, as much as we say there's value for statistics, that value is not matched with the funding that goes with it. In other words, one would say that there is no walking with the talk. I wanted just to say a little bit about, really what the value of statistics is about. I think the value of anything can only be appreciated if you have some tangible or, something that goes with it or accrues some kind of benefit. English people say that the proof of the pudding is in the eating, meaning that you can only test or judge something when you have tested it. And you cannot talk about it just by appearance, because it is there. You have to have a test of it. And that test of it, must come with a value. And the quality of it must be seen by what is being invested in it. So really there's a disconnection between what the statements that we hear about statistics being very important. Everyone says so. Statistics are so important, and we must make sure we put money to it, we must invest, but we don't see the resources going to statistics. So I think as governments and also the development partners and those that are able to, the good well wishers of statistics, they need to begin to think about where do we actually put the money. And the money is to this oil, the new oil that has been found, which is statistics, which is the grease of the wheels that needs to be maintained over a period of time, and ensuring that there is sustained capacity that needs to be built around that. I think as long as we're going to remain just as talking shops and agreeing that these are important without having to attach resources to it, that is not the way to go. And that, like you rightly pointed out, when you look at, for instance, in civil restoration or even the national strategies that the countries that develop, which look so fantastic, well developed, and in most cases even aligned to the national development plans, they are not well resourced. There's no funding that go along with those national strategic plans. And I think that's the paradigm that needs to be changed. We need to shift that change to ensure that there is now money that needs to be put. And particularly now, if we are going to be saying that we need to inform the SDGs by 2030, if we don't realign ourselves, perhaps even the reporting on SDGs would actually be worse off than we did under the MDGs. And we've seen in some of the cases, if you look at the data on the SDGs, you see a lot of holes in there. And one begins to question is that, are we moving at the same speed that we did when we moved with the MDGs? I think the answer is no. So yes, there's so much money that is out there, but is that money being put in the right way to be able to make the changes that is required? I talked about earlier on about people being relating themselves to the statistics or to the numbers that we produce. If we don't change, by the time we get to 2030, people will not, the citizens will not be able to relate themselves to the numbers that we're producing because they will be totally different. So we need to change and really walk the talk. The commitments that are being made by the development partners, the commitments that are being made by governments must be made and be able to put the resources and so that we can make the change that is necessary. Thank you.
Thanks. And Hernan, you come from a statistical agency that has been the success story of putting the relevance of data in the eyes of politicians. Can you give us a little bit of enlighten us on how that happened? How was there a decree that declared a national emergency to create good data?
Okay. Yeah. First of all, I wanted to add some things because I have here things, very important things about capacity building and how to create the conditions for doing that. We had an opportunity, we had a crisis. Very well recognized for 50 years since it was created. Only during this period of almost 10 years, between 2007 and 2015, the capacities, the statistical capacities of Argentina and the NSO were reduced. So coming back was not so difficult because we had statistical capacities. We had to bring back the correct people, the correct teams, the ones that knew how to do it technically. But capacity building and now the new approach of capacity development is not just technically, you have to work also on the institutional stream. And there are some things that has to be done, and not always you have the opportunity. What I've heard here is that Argentina has a crisis, but not all the NSOs have these opportunities. But challenges are also opportunities. We are facing two big challenges right now. One is the SDGs, the other one is the data revolution. So I would say that we have to detect these policy windows, opportunity windows, to introduce the reforms or to build the capacity we want. So what I mean is that if you understand and detect correctly the opportunity windows, you have the opportunity to move forward with those things that otherwise would never happen. Our statistical law has 50 years old, and it's not the first time that we want to change it. But of course, given what it happened in Argentina, we have now the opportunity to propose those changes that should have been done in the past. But of course, NSOs are always or sometimes left behind, and sometimes they are in the corner of the governments, because if the data or the SDGs or data revolution is not present, you don't have the conditions just to make visible your own agenda. And that's the important thing. What we did in Argentina was just to use that, just to detect it correctly, just also know the capabilities we had, because you can have a very ambitious plan and maybe fail in the middle. So this is a step-by-step. This is trying to use every opportunity you got in order to construct, construct or develop capacities in the statistical manner. Another thing I want to say is that once you got granted the independence of the statistical office and build the statistical capacities in the technical and in the institutional streams, reliable data will be trusted by the users, and that's the most important thing. Credibility is one of our main inputs. If people do not believe you, you will do surely worst surveys, because they won't answer you in a proper manner. And NSOs can play a unique role, and that should be highlighted every time we can, because the NSOs can offer confidentiality, transparency, impartiality, opportunity, timely service. I've had 3 years ago, when I started in this position and we started this transformation in Argentina, I have heard quite famous statistician in the statistical community that say that NSOs are a museum of statistical series. And that's the unique role that we can play. Just the access to information flows over time. That's a thing that nowadays only an NSO can offer. And we have to always remark the value of the statistical offices. Because, as you said, and you show it in your slide, you only want the water when there is not there, or when the quality is not enough good. And that happened to us. We had a social demand. We have international organizations demands. The EMF declare or issue the declaration of censure over the statistical system of Argentina. And also another international organizations were demanding a better statistical system. So that created political economy conditions for introducing reforms, also the social demand. Only in a severe crisis or an extreme case like the one in Argentina, you could have a social demand, but the statistical and the true, telling the truth was in the presidential campaign in 2015. So politicians were discussing which a statistical system we wanted. So that's great. That's an opportunity of visibility being in the agenda of the politicians. And that is a good question you ask in your book. Why should they want good statistics. We have heard here, we are all involved in the data production, and we know why is that important. But why should they want? Why should they want to being measured by independent agencies that maybe will say things that they don't like? So studying that and just giving the answers, in Argentina we have learned, and people have learned, that when the water was off and we were in the desert, statistics do care. We got many guidelines of good practices and the fundamental principles on official statistics. And after yesterday, in another panel, that they are not for us. They are not for the data producers. We know how we should produce the statistics in impartiality, transparency. They are for the policymakers. It's teaching, it's lesson. Good practices are there just as guidelines for the policymakers how the data should be produced in order to have NSOs that are museums of statistical series. So we should never stop repeating, or we should never stop making visible what the good practices, what the statistical good practices are, and why they are for. So I stop here, but I think there are some lessons that we should always transfer to politicians because they change. The statisticians are more stable, but politicians always change. And maybe you think that they know what you're talking about, but that's not so sure. So we have to always refresh it, and also having the legal frameworks that are also, if they have all the good practices in it and the formal adoption of those good practices, they have also that teaching function and a normative function, but teaching function to the users, to the ones that sometimes are impatient and asking us for data in more speed than is possible, and so on. So thank you.
All right, thanks. Philip, so some of the panelists have mentioned, trust, credibility, and this question of, how do we make sure that people see their life reflected in the data that is produced, either by the statistical agencies or by other data producers? Do you have an answer for that? How do we make the people live the SDGs, for example?
Well, I would like to go very specifically to our SDG agenda, because when we started this agenda, almost now 4 years in the implementation, we talked about data revolution, we talked about a new oil, and what has it produced so far, and how much do we see each other reflected into there? I would like to go back to the 3 last Julys at the HLPF, the High-Level Political Forum in New York, where the countries presented their voluntary national reviews. And I would like to ask you statisticians, how many of you have been involved in the formulation and the elaboration and the national processes of your national voluntary reviews? How many statistical annexes do we have as users in order to see where you're basing your implementation, your efforts, and also your evolution into this agenda? I think that's a question we have to ask ourselves, because we are talking about a data revolution. We are talking constantly about how important data is. But I want to ask you as well, how many of you statisticians actually go in July to New York to present your reviews, and how much are you included in a daily basis for the national processes in order to monitor and evaluate the implementation of the SDGs? And that's a question where I think we have still a lot of gray areas, where actually that data revolution hasn't kicked in. It is a discourse. For me, it is much more a fashion and a lot of pilot projects. But where's the real-time data that we are using in order to really produce evidence that gives us the opportunity to see our advantages, our challenges, and also what we need to do better in order to implement the 17 SDGs in a holistic and multidimensional way. So that's the first part. The second part of it, and where we are and how we are using that data, I believe that has to do, the first part, about capacities. I do believe capacity development is still a lack in order really to talk the same language. We're hearing a permanent discourse that it's very important to get data, non-official data sets, like from the private sector, in order to introduce them into national statistics and into the monitoring and evaluation process. Tell me how many countries have done that right now that were in July at the HLPF and presented actually a VNR that included non-official statistics in order to integrate them into the process. That's number one. Number two, I would talk about the generation of evidence. I think that's the second point that we really have to do. We cannot only produce statistics, we have to make evidence in our case in order to do so. So that's the third point, it's the use of that data. How do we really interpret and make an effort in order to use it wisely for the policy, for the monitoring and evaluation? And lastly, how do we transfer that evidence to a broader stakeholder community? And I think that's the interface that we need still to work on, especially in science and technology, who are good partners in order to interpret data and actually make good use of it. I don't see them on board at this very moment. So I'm quite pessimistic right now on the advantage when going into the fourth year of the implementation of the SDGs and seeing how that data revolution has really kicked into reality. How much are we really taking this seriously, not only to create pilot projects, not only to be in a fashion line, but also to really tackle that agenda in order to make use of the data that we have. That statistics become the soil, actually, of a monitoring and evaluation processes of our countries. That's where I want to see a data revolution kicking in, and that's how I see a holistic and multidimensional agenda really being part of a transformative way forward in order to implement successfully by 2030 the SDGs in all latitudes in a universal way, and including, of course, the different stakeholders that make part of the development ecosystem.
And in that line, Michelle, you have been involved for many years in the statistical community, and you have seen, the Statistical Commission, the back of the Statistical Commission start getting fuller and fuller with other organizations that are national statistical offices. And now, we look at this room, and we see a great mix of not only data users, but non-official data producers. But the question is, how do we get this message? Something along the lines that Philip was saying. How do we get it out of this room? How do we make politicians care and want to know, the relevance of data?
I would suggest two approaches. One that is short-term and to be implemented on a regular basis. And this is the institutional relationship that needs to be established between those who have the mandate to pull data together and the political world. In the sense that at the institutional level, we need first to recognize that whenever we are dealing with policymakers, with politicians, we must recognize the way they work, the way they operate, the way they think. They have systems in place. They have protocols. They have a clear agenda. We need to align what we're doing to that agenda, to their system. So it is for us to make sure that our data systems will be mirroring the political agenda in every respect, whether you're looking at parliament, whether you're looking at government per se, at central level, at local level, etc. We need to have a proper map of that political landscape and make sure that mirroring that landscape, we have our own statistical system that will be the reflection of that one, both in terms of content, in terms of time frame, in terms of the problems which are being tackled by government and which will translate into data solutions provided by data producers. The second approach to this is the longer-term approach. When we say the political world, we are looking at institutions. But those institutions are led and manned and operated by people, by politicians, men and women. But where do they come from? The politicians that would be educated on data today may disappear tomorrow. They may be voted out in 5 years. And then there will be a new group of politicians that may emerge, and therefore you need again to train these individuals. So this is why we need to look at where they come from. They come from the population at large. So we need to have a system whereby every single individual in the country, irrespective of who they are, what they are doing, where they live, should be educated real time on the data. And this takes time. But I'm convinced that when data has become a language, when data has become the new culture, people will be breathing in and out data. In that way, when they belong to a particular institution, government, parliament, etc., the only thing they will be doing is to package their knowledge into the requirements of the government unit they belong to. And regarding this longer-term approach, yet again yesterday, we said there are means that are there for us to learn from what is being done. An example is television. Why not having a data television? I'm asking Oliver, I may be asking the African Development Bank from whom I'm working, I may be turning to the World Bank, why not having even an SDG television that will be broadcasting worldwide, or looking at Africa-wide, so that anyone would be educated on data in relation to their own individual and community realities. Thank you.
Thomas, you wanted to?
Yeah, just, well, on this one, I think for us, even in a country, in a developed country, one of the big challenges is to make sure that our population realizes how interconnected they are with the world. And so I really like this communication side. But if you allow me, Jose, Antonio, I'd like to react to Philip's point about the high-level political forum and the involvement of NSOs. I mean, I'm very proud that in our case in Switzerland, they are very much involved, and there is an annex, and there we put the data into a voluntary national report that comes straight from our NSO. But the opportunity is 2019. Let's remember that the high-level political forum and the review system of the SDGs is under review next year, and this community has a chance to change, at least to influence the rules. I mean, we have people here from DESA, etc. I mean, the guidelines on how voluntary national reviews are made, the way the HLPF is made, the space that is afforded to the global partnership on sustainable development data. I mean, all these kind of things could be up for discussion next year. So, I mean, let's watch this space.
Yeah, no, so clearly the political economy is not only at the national level, but clearly at the international level. And you know, they say that time flies when you're having fun. We have 6 minutes, one for each of you to make some closing remarks. So we'll start in the, well, let's just start with you, Oliver.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's one issue that we've not properly addressed, that probably maybe not only in this forum, but maybe in the previous forums. And this is we have assumed that we know the kind of data that users need. We have assumed we know the data that is required by the citizens, by the politicians, and so forth, which is not the case. And I think we need, as statisticians, to begin to devise means of engaging with the public, reaching out to the public, and I think that's the communication part comes in. How do we engage with the public to be able to, collect data or produce data that they will require on their side? The second part, I think, that we have not really addressed also is that we have assumed that we as statisticians or national statistical officers, we are the only players. And that's not the case. And especially now, there are many actors that are producing data in different forms. There are many actors that have even better technologies than the national statistical offices. How are we relating them with the civil society, for instance? How are we relating with the NGOs, the other players, the others that actually have even a political influence, a political voice that influences the decision-making at country level, even without having to produce the statistics? We are not relating with those. So I think we need to change, bring in other people at the table, the civil society, perhaps maybe even the guidelines that are being proposed. Can we have guidelines that will embrace the civil society as part of the national statistical system? I know in some countries where some of the civil society even produce poverty numbers. And sometimes even the government begins to listen to them than what is being produced by national government. So the engagement with the civil society, with the NGOs, and other agencies, I think this is the time. And if we don't do this, the question we'll be asking ourselves in 2030, are we going to still be relevant, given the new scenario that we are sitting in? Thank you.
All right. Haitian?
First of all, I want to really echo the urgency expressed by Philip. Indeed, even despite some positive recent change, our investment in data is not sufficient. We really need better and larger scale and longer term commitment. And we would love to work with Thomas and other similar minded donors to really push for this issue. Second, indeed, as government statistical systems, that we really want to ensure that we have independence and impartiality, but at the same time, we also need to realize by providing the trustful and reliable information, we can insert into the more political process to influence that much more proactively. And earning that trust, but also influencing the public perception and policymakers' decision-making process. And lastly, I think to ensure the National Statistical Office's national statistical systems influence, we really need to enlarge our user base by not only partnering up with other data players and other data producers, but also engage with the broader user base, be it civil society, be it citizens directly, in order to really make sure the data we produce will generate that kind of influence.
Hernan?
Well, I think that it's important. Have we been talking here? I think it's important to create awareness on the processes behind reforms and to addressing all demands that the NSOs are getting. Yes, we know we got these challenges in front of us. We need resources. We need reforms of the NSOs. We need to build capacities technically and institutionally. But it's also very important that all the other stakeholders in the statistical and data community understand the limitations of the NSOs. For example, we were talking about the high-level political forum. Not all the NSOs can send one person to the UN to escort the politicians that are going there, especially the developing countries. Not everyone, not every director can afford to be a week out of the office, not only because of the resources, also because there is a lot of work to be done. And there are not many people just for doing that. So that's also in the capacities of the NSO. And also the normative, the legal limitations that the NSOs have. Also, by producing the data, we have limitations. We have to do quality data. We have to do official statistics. So we have to follow some guidelines of good statistical practices. As I said before, we are the museums of the statistical series. So we have to follow these limitations, and you should be aware of that. And last, we want to get involved. NSOs wants to get involved. When we are doing changes, and we are doing reforms, and we are addressing the demands, and we are facing the challenges. We have just different speeds, and that is also a point that should be understood. We have different speeds. We have these limitations where within governments, we don't have all the political enforcement we should have. So we have to deal with all these limitations and creating that awareness. And I think the World Data Forum is a good atmosphere just to transfer that and for the data communities to connect each other and communicate and just to tell our problems and tell our limitations, and let's see what can we do with that. Thank you.
Okay, Philippe?
Yes, well, since I'm a believer of the SDGs, and I believe that this is the last time that we really can be sustainable in our lifetime, I do believe NSOs should take that lead and be not only in New York to escort any politician, but actually make a difference and support the whole process. So I want to make sure that being a believer into this agenda, believing in the NSOs, I do believe we have the responsibility to take that time. Therefore, I believe 2019, it's not only a crucial, but actually a year of change, where we can change governance structures that are in place right now, and we are seeing that needs to have an evolution. We do need to trigger the finance in order that we create better statistics and that real-time data is connected to the SDG process. So that will be my 3 points, and I would like to see many, and hopefully all of you, in next year's HLPF and in the 2019 summit in September, in order to work together and really make a difference and not only be in theory, but practically driven, because that's our chance to make a difference. So thank you very much.
All right. Michel?
For us to make a difference, and I fully agree with you, we need to review our system. We have been talking about national statistical system, but that NSS does not mean what we had in mind before. We need to redefine it. It has no border anymore, to the extent that we don't know who we are. When we say we produce data, what is the meaning of we? We are good at taking censuses, but so far, we have not taken any census of who we are, what we are doing, who is doing what, where, when, why, and how. I think this should be the starting point. Once we have that system clear, then we'll be more comfortable in showing to everyone that this is our power. And this power, we wish to lend it to you. Thank you.
And Thomas, last word?
Okay, so just the word, huh? No, I just want to strengthen what Haishan just said about trust, because if we want data and statistics to be building the accountability to the people, and I hope that that's what we want, we have to build trust into the system. We have to involve the people also in discussions about what statistics and data is and not be defensive about it when they criticize us on this. So I look forward to the next panel, I think, which is on trust building in the statistics systems.
Well, no, thank you. Well, thank you to everybody for being here, and thanks to the panelists. And please join me in thanking the panelists for this excellent discussion.